Well, hello, folks. The other day, I had a conversation with a friend, and it was enjoyable for me and for us, I think. I like to talk to people one on one or whenever I can because that kind of give and take, being able to see a person's reaction to what you're saying and to listen intently at what another person's saying, to ask questions, to feedback, like, are you aware of this concept? No, let me explain it to you. Or, I wasn't aware of that. You feedback and uh, you can see, the emotional response on a person's face and their, physical behavior, whether or not they are comfortable with what you're saying, uncomfortable with what you're saying, whether they understand it or not, and so on and so forth. Anyway, it's just so much nicer to talk to people face to face. When I was younger, I used to go to several cafes and pubs and meet people, and we would sit around and talk, discuss books we were reading, tell stories and whatnot. And that was just the way we did things. We didn't have social media, we didn't have smartphones, and uh, and it was very pleasurable, having those connections with people in your community. Um, gosh, I was talking about a lot of things, and we were discussing a bunch of stuff. And the usual things for me just keep coming up over and over again. One is this idea of free will and agency. And I mean that in the cultural sense of, well, I voted, I went out and I protested Black Lives Matter or something, which is fine. I mean, people want to do things, they feel compelled to do stuff, go on a march, go on a protest or whatever, hold up a sign, proselytize, whatever you want to do. Uh, but the thing that always, concerns me about it is that there's a kind of blind, uh, I don't want to be unfair, but virtue signaling to it all. And also a group thing, right? You just want to fit into whatever clique you identify with, which is fine, that's normal. But your actions are not necessarily your actions because we're all programmed all the time by things we encounter in life. And, it's this delicate interaction between all the things happening in our bodies physiologically, and that includes neurologically and all the other stuff, the vagus nerve and the microbiome and whatever, and all the things that are going on um, outside, exogenously, outside our bodies that influence us. I've been trying to catch up on my sleep. I swear to God, I can't think. If I don't get 7 hours of sleep a night, and if I catch up on my sleep and I sleep for a week, getting 7 hours or a little more, maybe seven and a half, uh, I feel like a genius. I mean, my brain just works. I don't forget things. I don't have accidents. I don't make mistakes as much. It's just like, wow, everything works. I am not old. And, I love that. And then I, do certain things over work, or maybe I having too much fun or something. You know what that means. And my sleep hygiene goes to hell. And then I can't think. It takes, days of recovery to get my head back straight. Exercise helps a lot, resistance training and cycling and all that. But without sleep, you're really in trouble. But it is true that if you're like sleep deprived and you do some exercise, you'll get back a little bit of your brain power. I don't know why that is, but I'm sure people like Peter Attia could point you in the direction of studies along those lines. But anyway, the idea that we're making a free choice and acting as individuals to affect some purpose, to uh, do some work, to achieve something. And so we go and we march around and we think we're achieving something when we're just reacting to the same stuff that everybody's reacted to since the founding of the United States of America. I'm putting this in a US context. It's not as if the oligarchs and the idea that elites don't like democracy and the idea that, the first things we cut when we cut any budgetary things is anything that goes to social welfare or infrastructure for the ordinary folks. It's always been like that, and you throw a dart at a historical timeline and examine any place in the United States, political battles and so on, and you'll see it over and over and over and over again. And there's a great podcast this morning, Citations Needed, where they go into that in depth, and I'll put that in the usual places. If you want to see
thinks of themselves as an individual economic unit who is responsible for their own success and failure, which ultimately is one of the biggest myths in our contemporary society, right? This is what the globe emoji myth is, that we are capable of controlling our own destiny within the society that we live in. And that's absolutely not true. I think it's also worth pointing out that the kind of survival of the fittest ideology, right? This idea that is often tied to Charles Darwin is actually not part of Darwin's theory of evolution. This is something that was conceptualized by his cousin, Sir Francis Galton, who's the father of eugenics. So survival of the fittest as a kind of narrative ignores the fact that for all of human history, our survival has been based on cooperation.
what informs my opinion, you can go to those usual places and read up on it yourself, follow the hyperlinks, read books, and so on, and you'll have a better idea of where I get my worldview. And I encourage you to do that because anybody who thinks they're being informed by watching the news or reading the newspaper or following things on social media or following things in the media in general without the ability to think critically in a fairly disciplined and rigorous and focused manner is probably being misinformed, malinformed, just not quite getting the whole picture. In other words, you're not learning anything. You're not gaining knowledge. You're just being buffeted about by information. And being buffeted about by information does not demonstrate your freedom or free will. So I question the idea that most Americans have any freedom, or even maybe, as Robert Sapolsky might say, they lack free will altogether. But freedom and democracy, those things, I mean, what is democracy? And again, you have to look at different forms of democracy. I won't go into that, but, parliamentary and different ways of representation. In the States, we have separations of power, and we have the Congress, we have the executive, and we have, the Constitution and civil rights. And most people don't know anything about any of these things. So in the States, we're educated in STEM. We're kind of trained to fit into bits and pieces of the economy and, have a job and earn some money. And that goes way, way back. Real people are hard workers and you work for the man, the capitalist, for the boss, for the owners, and, pull themselves up by the bootstraps in that way. Those are real people. And anybody who doesn't live like that in the past or today is a freeloader or a savage or whatever. We couch indigenous people in those terms. They're savages, they're ignorant. Where that's not true. They have tremendous knowledge about their environment and how to live in it, their watersheds, the plants and animals in their environment, all that. At some point, we will lack that knowledge to our chagrin, to say the least, because nothing's going to stop the cascading of predicaments that we're in, unsolvable problems that stem from modern techno-industrial civilization and from the religion of economics. And none of that's going to go away. It's unsolvable. People talk about mitigation. They talk about adaptation, deep adaptation to the cascading predicaments or the polycrisis or climate change or whatever. But these are essentially unsolvable because of our mode of living, our way of life, our mode of managing our presence within this ecosphere. And some people are starting to notice bit by bit that things are a little bit off, and maybe the promises of progress and freedom and democracy actually isn't what they thought. It's a self-terminating omnicidal heat engine, as opposed to a teleological straight line path to greater glory in the future, to boldly go where no man has gone before, and so on and so forth. So we have this idea that, reacting to all these political events and administrations is somehow effective, that it does something. It doesn't. If it did, we wouldn't be in this situation. It's a monoparty in the States. It leans to the right. Only superficially or cosmetically, there could be something lefty. But of course, let's not define these terms now. It's a waste of time. But you know what I mean. One side gets in and they undo what the other side did last time, and then they do their thing. And then the other side gets in, undoes the things that the other side did. So basically, it's this faux or false competition between two sides that are really on the same side, which is mammon, growth, money, wealth, for them, not for people. Not really. I mean, you get fooled because you can go to a big box store for a couple decades and buy cheap shit that you want to buy on credit, or maybe with real money that you earned and don't have to borrow and pay interest on. But anyway, you're happy about that. You get to fit in, wear the right clothes, drive the right car, all that kind of stuff. And so you think everything's great, and then they tell you, no, it's not great because, for some reason, somebody, exported our jobs overseas and we don't manufacture anything. Anyway, you know the story. You hear it all the time. If you listen to these economists and to this kind of narrative, you're not doing yourself any favors, because this belief system and these narratives have nothing whatsoever to do with reality. They don't have to do with physics. They don't have to do with biology. They don't have to do with time. They don't have to do with quality life, with community, with anything positive in human culture. And at the end of the day, like I say, ecocide has a very high price, because human habitat disappears eventually. Extinction is the absolute end of this story for our species, but that doesn't matter, because for now we're okay. We can still go to the store and buy stuff. We don't have to think about where our food comes from. We don't have to think about soil biology or how to get drinking water or how to manage our sewage systems or anything. Things are still in place. We can still travel around, buy cheap airplane tickets, and so on. So we haven't quite noticed it enough yet. But many people for over 200 years have noticed what modern civilization brings. And, we all like it because we're all addicted to it. And I'm the same way. I'm addicted to modernity, modern technology, services, all the things that I've taken for granted my whole life. But I recognize and have for about, intensely for about over 15 years. But going back, I was sympathetic with ecology and these kinds of things from childhood. But anyway, more recently, in the past 15, 20 years, I've been more curious about how things actually work and whether they are good for us or not. And I've discovered that they're not. So, God, in conversation, I can talk about this so much better than to a camera. And I don't want to just read notes and stuff. I posted a lot of interesting quotes and whatnot today. Like I just mentioned Sapolsky. He's a very interesting social scientist and lots of content on the YouTube. So a behavior is the end product of what happened in your brain a second ago, of environmental stimuli, which condition those neurons in your brain to do what they did a second ago. And the hormones you had in your bloodstream this morning, and what happened to you in the last few months. Your brain may have changed its structure during your adolescence, childhood, or fetal life, either because of your genes or because of the culture in which you have grown up. It is biology over which we have no control. Interacting with the environment over which we have no control. And when you look at all these influences, you realize that neurobiology influences your decisions, as does genetics, geochronology, and social psychology. It is not that all these disciplines are different, but that they become one discipline. So it's interesting to think of things in this way because everything in our world is a narrative to support power structures and powerful groups of people and institutions. And all the rest is advertising. All the rest is marketing and propaganda and public relations. And we want to believe that we can engineer our way out of the problems that our engineering and technology have created. That's the fantasy. We can fix it. I can mess things up really badly, but then I can come up with a solution. That's what the green tech is all about. But we don't think about energy return on energy invested enough. And these are things where we have to come to terms with borrowing from the future, but not in a good way. In other words, we're not just borrowing to pay the rent this month. We're borrowing to buy 5 mansions and 12 yachts and 17 cars and whatever that we don't need, that we can never pay off, ever. We can never pay for. And the debts just keep mounting up as we use more and more materials and more energy. So anyhow, you think you have freedom and democracy? You don't. The elite never wanted you to have too much representation. They wanted you always, and I mean the elite, the people who are players in the great game, the people who actually control the capital, who have the wealth and influence, who program you, who decide what your educational system is going to look like, how it's going to be funded, and so on. These people don't want you represented because it will diminish their power. And they believe in their arrogance and preposterous psychopathy that they know best. And they believe they know best simply because they have more power and they have more money. So nothing has changed. And if you want to go and protest, this administration or that administration, thinking it matters, unfortunately, you're just plain wrong. It didn't matter 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, and it doesn't matter now. I believe in fighting for things like civil rights and women's rights and certain issues, but these have to be fought at a local level, strategically, with a purpose, with an outcome in mind. You can't just vaguely talk about this, that, and the other thing and think some magic is going to happen. You have to go where you can make a difference, where you can leverage or push or inspire the leaders that you've helped put in their position to do the right thing according to the consensus of your, democratic community discussions. And you can't do that by just going out and saying, well, we don't like this. I know what motivates people more than anything, and that's when their retirement fund is diminished, when they're seeing it shrink because of idiotic policies. And America's been dumbing down for a long time, and there's this insane feedback loop between politicians making, or let's just call it politicians, whatever, elite, whatever. It's just a word for a group of people who have some little agency in the whole affair. And they decide that they want to keep you pretty stupid because if you knew too much, you might push back and diminish their power. So you become dumber and dumber and more distracted in the fire hose flood of information coming at you every day that you can't digest, that you don't understand, and most of it's a black box, inaccessible, incomprehensible. And so you start to become dumber and dumber and buffeted about by bullshit, culture wars, Q, whatever, 4chan, discussions on Reddit, social media, whatever. And you can't think things through. You don't have a moment of peace to slow down and think carefully about how things really actually work, or to learn the knowledge and the skills really necessary to understand how things work. And I keep bringing up physics and biology as core, and then being numerative enough to understand how people mess around with numbers to misinform you. But so the people get dumber because the elite want a dumb, pliant, domesticated, helpless, hopeless, kind of listless constituency. And, of course they give you some hope. They make you believe that they're going to win this fight that's so important about, making government more efficient by cutting services to normal people and giving more money to the Department of War. But you know where the money's actually going and where it has been going all the time. But you believe in it anyway because it's emotionally exciting and salient to you to think that you're going to own the libs or you're going to put the damn deplorables in their place or whatever the thing. And you can talk about specific policies. Obviously, you have things that you're concerned about, picadillos and other things like that. And so you know what I'm talking about. So the people get dumber. So then they accept dumber leaders, people who are just blowhards. If you want to get a lot of views on the internet, you have to act very assertive, very crazy, talk a mile a minute, and just spout bullshit that sounds reasonable to people. But if you challenge them, your audience is going to go way, way down. So if you are talking about theoretical physics or something, obviously it's not going to be as popular as the Kardashians because it requires some previous knowledge and understanding to even get your head around. The vocabulary itself is inaccessible to most people. And there have been so many studies now at how ignorant people are, despite the fact that there are more high school graduates and college graduates and graduate school graduates in the United States than there ever have been. You would think we would all be smart, brilliant critical thinkers now, but that's not what powers the machine. Ignorance powers the machine. That's a key concept here. So now we have dumber people running things, and they understand how to be effective, which is just to bullshit. So we have fewer real experts. We don't know how to listen to real experts because we don't understand their domain of interest at all anymore. Can't get our head around it. We become culturally insensitive, socially inept, and more outraged and confused. And this terrible feedback loop just keeps going and going. Now, who can take advantage of this? Anybody who can play the game. Insider trading, buy low, sell high, cause chaos, make money off of it, sell arms. You know, there's so many examples of how people profit from this chaos, from this ignorance. And, you know, it's nothing new. You can go back and read anything, you know, even going back to biblical times. Why is there so many inconsistencies in the Gospels and so on? You know, was Jesus two gods? He was, why has God forsaken me? Now, you know, what is it, you know? And then in another gospel, there's none of that, and so on and so forth. There's so many inconsistencies there. But if you ask a Christian about any of these inconsistencies, they're going to say it's not there. Oh, yes, it is. Here it is. You know, Matthew or whatever, you know, chapter, whatever. And they say, yeah, but that's not what they meant. You know, they meant to say something else. So we cherry pick whatever to form a narrative that suits us. And then we spread that narrative and it goes viral. And so we're stuck with all these little mimetic machines, mind viruses, brain worms that are loaded into our operating system and take us over. So you think you have freedom and democracy? You're not even in control of your own thought processes, and you're just doing stuff kind of chaotically, sporadically, without much strategic or tactical understanding or vision, without the desire to actually do work that's going to have an outcome that is going to accomplish what you vaguely think you're trying to accomplish. So it's extremely difficult predicament that we have. And unfortunately, you know, all of this boils down to overshoot, to critically examining our way of life, whether science, engineering, and technology as we use it today is beneficial or detrimental to life on Earth. All the evidence, scientific evidence, would say that the sixth extinction, what's happening to polluted oceans and so on, what's happening with inequality, what's happening with wars around the globe, and these insane people discussing, you know, bombing Iran or going to war with China at this particular time in history, all lines of evidence would point to your understanding that this way of life is not only unsustainable, but it's becoming more chaotic, more dangerous, more destructive every single day. and the future is baked in. We can't stop it. So what do we do about it, right? I'm absolutely convinced, and I'm hardly ever convinced at anything that I think because I'm learning stuff all the time. But it's not getting any better than this. And the challenges that we're facing in the near future, I'm not talking about, your grandchildren, you can write off, but in your near future, like the coming years, days, decades, is going to be more and more difficult. There are more and more challenges. We are going to hit 3C above the pre-industrial baseline. It's going to have incredible cascading effects, incredible positive feedbacks and tipping points that are going to cause all manner of mayhem and destruction. And our economy isn't up to task. It isn't. Why? Because it's all about growth. Yeah, I mean, if we're going to believe in the kind of growth that we're talking about, we get into overshoot territory, and this is going to crash civilization, full stop. And there's nothing you can do about it because you can't argue, you can't use religious belief or proto quasi economic religious belief to contradict laws of nature that we understand through our study of physics. And even if we didn't understand physics, and we do, this is why we have modern techno-industrial civilization, nature's still in charge. Physics and biology we don't have any control, as Robert Sapolsky said. But anyway, this is Noam Chomsky. He said, and this is about the information ecosystem, which is why we believe we're doing things, but we're not really doing things. We have this illusion that there's some dialogue going on that has some effect, positive outcome for the whole picture, the story of life that we live. But it just goes in circles. Another 4 years from now, we're going to be in the same shit. We were 4 years ago, we were 4 years before that, and it never ends. We kill millions of people in the Middle East, wars for 20 years, and we're going to go into China and do it now. Have we learned anything? Have we accomplished anything? You think it's going to be good for you, for your retirement fund, for your 401k, for your stock and bond portfolio? I don't think so. Later on, I'll discuss why we have to get local, but I'll read this quote. In general, the mainstream media all make certain basic assumptions, like the necessity of maintaining a welfare state for the rich. And there's Noam Chomsky decades ago saying this. What's new? Robber barons, Gilded Age, Roaring Twenties, Great Gatsby. So within that framework, okay, a welfare state for the rich, maintaining that, within that framework, there's some room for differences of opinion. And it's entirely possible that the major media are toward the liberal end of that range. It's possible. But the Overton window and all this stuff, it keeps going in recent years towards fascism, towards corporatist far right ideology. But anyway, liberal end of that range, it's going towards that. In fact, in a well-designed propaganda system, that's exactly where they should be. So you want to be a Democrat. I've heard people over the many decades tell me that they're physically conservative, but they're culturally more liberal, this kind of thing. What are they talking about? I want my girlfriend to be able to have an abortion because I'm a cad. I'm a womanizer. Sorry, that was not nice. In fact, in a well-designed propaganda system, that's exactly where they should be. The smart way to keep people passive and obedient is to strictly limit the spectrum of acceptable opinion, but allow very little debate within that spectrum. even encourage the more critical and dissident views. That gives people the sense that there's free thinking going on, while all the time the presuppositions of the system are being reinforced by the limits put on the range of the debate. So this is the thing. You think you're talking about something. Actually, you're parroting something that's been going on for decades, because it comes in and you parrot it. That's fine. That we all do that. But the range of debate is limited already. So within that narrow range, you think you're having a really profound discussion. But it's the same discussion. I've known economists personally who were on CNN, doing their little thing, their little comments on the economy over the years. They're all in their 30s. They're all, mainstream, educated economists, and they're all there just to serve the system that rewards the players. And they all say the same thing. You can go back in time and take snippets out of what they're talking about. Doesn't matter if it's 5, 10, 20, 40 years ago. They're saying the same stuff about growth and about this and that, whatever. So the spectrum of debate is limited anyway. So what are you talking about? So people like me are very lonely because we want to talk about overshoot and stuff like that. Nobody wants to deal with that because we have a optimism bias. We want to be optimistic. It just feels better. And we're going to go out there and look for all the solutions to predicaments that have no solutions, because the solutions are the cause of the predicament. So people will, try to be optimistic, which is nice. It feels good. I'm not saying you're bad if you want to be optimistic. So there's a funny meme where they have the cup sitting on the edge of a table, and one person says, "Cup half empty." The other person says, "Cup half full." And the other person said, "Cup looks like it's going to fall off the table." So there you go. Crash, right? There are many ways to look at an elephant. And, it's funny to me that people don't want to talk about the elephant shit and the gorilla shit in the room, which is we're destroying life on Earth. It shouldn't be Earth Day. It should be Life on Earth Day. Because without this complex, adaptive, distributed system we call life, with all of its emergent properties and feedback loops, both positive and negative, and all these things going on, without that, we don't exist at all. We never would have evolved. And still in the United States, there are so many people who are ignorant of the theory of evolution. They believe God created everything 6,000 years ago and stuff. So the ignorance is built in. Why? Because, there's no real incentive to enlighten people. The players can get filthy rich without having enlightened people around. They're only going to cause problems, right? You have Martin Luther King or Malcolm X or somebody, or even Putler speaking common sense, and you can't listen to those people, right? So all of this is highly limiting, and it doesn't really lead us anywhere. We're just going in circles. So the stochastic terrorism starts to rear its ugly head. People are manipulated and propagandized into war. And all of these cascading predicaments just continue. And we cross these tipping points and it's too late. But anyhow, economic systems are impossible to challenge once they become faith. That's why I call it proto and quasi-religious belief system, because it goes back to the advent or the nascent period of this type of economic thinking. And it's also quasi, so it's not exactly definitively religious, right? So economic systems are impossible to challenge once they become faith. Capitalism is the longest lived, most popular religion we ever created. And that's interesting to think about. I'm not sure what he means by that, because definitively, when did capitalism happen? But it's okay. We'll give him that. But faith cannot win over physics. Neither technology nor capitalism can ever beat this impossible mathematical equation that is crashing before our eyes like a chemical reaction exhausting its substrate. So, an explosion, right? What we call capitalism is a self-destruction machine keeping power, economy, religion, and society hostage to the biggest dogma that has ever existed, growth. I say it differently, but I've been saying it for a long time, what he just said there. But this idea of infinite growth on a finite planet is ridiculous. And I find it preposterous that more people can't just intuitively understand that, at least, right? Where does all this stuff come from? Energy return on energy invested. Every time we create work, energy, work, we're using energy to do that, right? There's energy invested in it. So what kind of work are you doing when you get buffeted about by the media, or are only concerned with your, a 401k, and can't think about the true causes of the predicaments that we're facing right now? So if you were to investigate and learn, become knowledgeable about overshoot and civilizational collapse, what would you do? Well, this is where local action comes into play. What we all must do now is start to reach out in our communities and talk face to face. Have these conversations, not to bum people out. You could go play petanque and chat while you're doing it, or go bowling and then have a meeting or a beer afterwards and talk about these things. Or you could have a group that got together and discussed how we're going to do things when there's no stuff on the shelf anymore, when transportation is too expensive, you can't buy gasoline or whatever. Maybe this won't happen soon enough for you to care, right? And maybe you don't want to care because you just want to have a good time, which is fine. Dance. If the Titanic's going down, am I going to panic? I'd probably go to the bar and get another drink and dance as long as the band played. What are my chances of surviving anyway, right? But you have to go out in your community and realize you're not going anywhere. At some point, we're not going to have YouTube anymore. We're not going to have cheap airline tickets. We're not going to be able to move around the planet. And we're going to have to reach out to our community and start figuring out how to take care of ourselves. Nothing's going to get easy. The tragedy of this whole thing is billions of people are going to starve to death. They're going to pass away. And as the chaos gets worse and worse due to all of these predicaments, of which climate change is a big one, but the pollution issues are huge. The ecocide that's ubiquitous across the planet is huge. There are all kinds of conflicts just waiting in the wings to happen, and nobody's talking about how to prevent them, how to make peace, how to collaborate in the face of this terrible fate that we're looking at, which is what we should be doing. We shouldn't vote for anybody who's not steeped in knowledge about overshoot about how to live properly in an environment that sustains us, in a living environment that sustains us. Anybody who doesn't get that, who's just going to talk about the stock market or whatever, we should boot them out of office. We shouldn't vote for them. We shouldn't stand up for them. You know, we're not talking about the right things here. Unfortunately, you know, right now everything's good. 8 billion people on the planet. We're still having a good time. So nobody wants to hear this. But this is going to happen sooner than later, sooner than you think. And my point is that even if we are frogs, you know, and the water is tepid right now, it's going to boil over and we are going to be cooked. So I don't know when that's going to happen. We can't predict the future. We don't have enough processing power in the universe to do that. But it's definitely going to happen, and it's happening now. And it would be better for all of us, psychologically, spiritually. It would be more fun if we took the bull by the horns, took responsibility for our part in the predicament. Not to say we caused it, but we're all part of this thing that we live in, this way of life, and say, okay, things are shifting, they're changing. What can we do to prepare ourselves psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, and physically, and in every other way, together as a community, to get through things so it's not quite as bad and horrific and scary and dangerous and violent as it could be. And while we do this, while we have this conversation, while we educate ourselves and each other, because certain people have more knowledge and information about certain domains than others, and we share this information together, we can make friends. We can connect. We can build some lasting, important relationships where we actually have a strategic, tactical vision of accomplishing something, doing work to achieve something in our community that's valuable, that is going to make people happier, healthier human beings. This is important. Now, it is exciting to go out and protest whatever, and people feel compelled to do so, and they should do what they feel compelled to do. I'm not criticizing them for that, but they have no agency here, really. They have no freedom, they have no democracy, and what they're doing is ineffectual. It's not going to accomplish what they think it's going to accomplish. It's not going to raise awareness. It's not going to educate. It's not going to make people more knowledgeable. It's not going to change the political economic system. It's not going to change who's the president or what they do. It's not going to change biology. It's not going to change physics. None of it. So perhaps our time would be better spent hanging out together and figuring out how we as a community are going to have a wonderful life. How about that? In the face of a very unfortunate and tragic fate. Okay, thanks a lot for listening, everybody. Please like and subscribe. I'd love it if you shared this with somebody. And I'd really love to hear a comment, thoughtful one, if you think I have said anything of value whatsoever. And if you want to know why I think like this, it's not because I have any original ideas or anything. You can see on my blog, my book recommendation page, my links we love page at cospelon.eu. You can go to Minds at BullieMT or Blue Sky at BullieMT, or you can go to Facebook page Globe Hackers, and you see what I share there. And I share some pretty interesting people who have knowledge and expertise in these areas and are very good at expressing, teaching, at providing resources, links to other writers and resources where you can learn about these things. It's important to know about these things. Obviously, if you're focused on just making more money and having more fun, uh, you didn't watch this to the end, so never mind. Enjoy your life. But yeah, so keep in touch and do that. And I really hope that someday in the future, near future, I can report back to you that I created or got together with a group of people or another group that's trying to, plan for tomorrow and live for today. Okay, so let's do what we can in the face of our fate. Take good care. Have a nice day. Booleum T out.